Woman has her house invaded at night, but is startled to realize they put a baby in the kitchen. Nora woke with a start in the middle of the night. The clock read exactly 3 a.m. Her heart was pounding as she heard noises banging on her door. Scared but determined to protect herself, she grabbed the pepper spray she kept in her nightstand drawer and carefully went down the stairs. The silence of the house was broken only by her own muffled footsteps on the living room carpet. For a moment, everything was quiet again. Nora slowly approached the windows, peeking cautiously through the curtain. The street was deserted, shrouded in the darkness of the night, with no sign of anyone. Just when she began to feel relieved, thinking it might have been just an animal or the wind, a different and definitely internal sound caught her attention. It was a faint but unmistakable cry of a baby. With her heart in her mouth, Nora followed the sound that guided her to the kitchen. There, on top of the table, was a baby crying in a slightly rumpled blanket. Hesitant, but moved by a maternal instinct she didn't know she possessed, she picked up the baby, trying to calm him. With every sob the baby let out, Nora felt more attached and worried. It was a boy with big blue eyes that, even amidst the crying, looked at Nora with surprising intensity. Nora had always dreamed of being a mother, but now that dream seemed distant, almost impossible. And yet, there was a child, as if fate had answered her most secret desires in a completely unexpected way. Even so, she knew she couldn't just keep a child found in her house without any explanation of how he had gotten there. With a heavy heart, she called the police, explaining the situation. The officers arrived quickly and confirmed there were no signs of a break-in. It was as if the baby had been left there on purpose. After handing the baby over to the competent authorities, Nora made a decision. She couldn't ignore the bond she already felt forming between her and the boy. So even knowing the process could be long and full of uncertainties, Nora got in line for adoption, requesting to be considered a priority due to the unusual circumstances of how the baby had appeared in her life. The days that followed were a mix of anxiety and hope. Nora frequently visited the shelter where the boy had been taken. Each visit reinforced the bond she felt for him. Each smile, each touch of the baby's tiny fingers on her hand, confirmed her decision to fight for him. While waiting for the resolution of her adoption request, Nora prepared her home and her heart for the possibility of finally becoming a mother. She redecorated one of the rooms, carefully choosing each item, each toy, and each book, imagining the day she could finally tell the world that the boy was her son. With each passing night, Nora allowed herself to dream, hopefully recalling that unexpected early morning that had changed her life forever. And even with the challenges and uncertainties, she felt grateful for the opportunity to love and be loved by that little child whom fate had placed in her path. Late into the night when the mysterious incident occurred, the police were perplexed. The absence of signs of a break-in was an enigma, and the fact that a baby had been left so strategically in Nora's house added a layer of mystery. Nora was thoroughly interrogated, with detectives trying to figure out how someone could have entered her home without leaving a trace. Seated before the investigators, Nora maintained a mysterious gaze, pondering her words carefully. "I really have no idea who could have done this," she finally said, her voice calm but firm. Despite the police's efforts, no leads on the boy's mother were found, and the case eventually went cold. Months later, with the adoption process concluded, Nora received the papers confirming she was now the legal mother of Eric. She raised him with all her love and dedication, seeing in him not just a son, but a miracle that had entered her life so inexplicably. Eric grew up in a home full of affection and structure under Nora's attentive care. He became a respectful and obedient boy who, over the years, began to exhibit traits and mannerisms that were surprisingly similar to Nora's. Their bond was strong, shaped not only by maternal love but also by the mutual respect and admiration they shared for each other. 20 years had passed since that mysterious early morning, and Nora, though older, still maintained a youthful appearance, something her friends and family often commented on. Eric, now a young adult, was in college and had plans for the future. On a sunny autumn day, Eric came home, overflowing with joy. "Mom, I got a job," he exclaimed as soon as he walked through the door, his eyes shining with the enthusiasm of the news. Without hesitation, he ran to hug Nora, who received him with open arms, sharing his happiness. "That's wonderful, Eric. I'm so proud of you," Nora said, feeling a wave of gratitude for this new achievement of her son. "What's the job?" Eric, still smiling, explained that he had been hired by a local company where he could gain practical experience in his field of study. But there was more on his mind than just his career. "Mom, with my first salary, I want to start saving to buy a car," he revealed, his gaze determined. "You've walked too much all these years. It will be great to make our lives easier, especially for you not having to walk so much to the supermarket, pharmacy, and doctors." Nora felt a mix of emotion and surprise. Eric had always been thoughtful, but hearing him speak so affectionately about taking care of her in this way warmed her heart. "Oh, Eric, that would be wonderful," she replied, a tear of happiness shining in her eye. "But the most important thing for me is to see you happy and achieving your dreams." The conversation extended into the afternoon, between plans for the future and shared laughter. Nora looked at Eric, seeing in him the same baby who had once been mysteriously left in her house. Now he was a man with dreams and a generous heart, and she couldn't be prouder of the son she had chosen to raise. From an early age, Nora had always been transparent with Eric about his adoption. She had told him the mysterious circumstances of how he had been left in her house on a silent early morning and how, against all odds, he had become her son. Eric, though initially curious about his origins, grew up with such a strong sense of connection to Nora that he couldn't imagine anyone else as his mother. Eric, motivated by the desire to reciprocate all the love and care Nora had provided him over the years, dedicated himself to working hard. In recent months, he had saved every penny he earned from his new job with a clear goal in mind: to buy a car. Finally, he had saved enough to make a down payment and pick up the vehicle from the dealership. One sunny afternoon, while Nora was hanging clothes on the line, she was interrupted by the persistent sound of a car horn. At first, she didn't pay much attention, but the persistence of the sound made her look. To her surprise, there was Eric, smiling behind the wheel of the new car. He waved enthusiastically, clearly proud of the surprise he had prepared. "Mom, get in. I'll take you for a ride," Eric called out, the smile on his face illuminating his entire being. From that day on, Eric made it a point to drive Nora everywhere. The new car was not just a means of transportation but a symbol of his gratitude and growing independence. One of these mornings, while Eric was driving to college with Nora beside him, who was going to the supermarket, she was looking distractedly out the car windows. The city streets paraded by, each with its own stories and secrets. It was then that her eyes caught a figure that made her heart race and her blood run cold. The figure was walking towards an old, dilapidated building, a place that looked like it was about to collapse at any moment. Nora couldn't contain herself and shouted, "Eric, stop the car!" Eric, surprised and a little scared by his mother's sudden outburst, slammed on the brakes. "Mom, what happened?" Nora, trying to hide the real reason for her panic, said quickly, I just saw a friend entering that building. I need to talk to her. It's very important." "I'll go with you," Eric offered, worried about Nora's state. But she insisted. "No dear, you'll be late for college. Go on, I'll be fine. It's just a quick chat." Reluctantly, Eric agreed, and after making sure once more that his mother was okay, he headed to college. As soon as the car drove away, Nora walked quickly towards the dilapidated building. The figure she had seen was someone from her past, someone she never expected or wanted to see again. With each step, the weight of that imminent reunion grew in her chest. It was a past she thought she had left behind, but which now emerged from the shadows to confront her once more. Eric returned home that night, still worried about his mother's strange behavior earlier that day. Upon entering, he found Nora in the living room, looking a bit distracted. "Mom, who was that friend you saw today?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his curiosity was evident. Nora hesitated for a moment before answering. "Oh, I was mistaken, Eric. It wasn't who I thought," she said, averting her gaze. Her voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension that Eric could feel. Eric, however, wasn't convinced. "Mom, I feel like you're hiding something from me," he insisted, his expression worried. Nora sighed. Eric, some things are private. It's not right to pressure your mother this way. Realizing he had gone too far, Eric quickly apologized and hugged Nora, trying to ease the tension. In the following days, Nora seemed more withdrawn and somber than usual, leading Eric to think she was still upset about their discussion. Determined to make amends and bring some joy to his mother, he planned a surprise. Knowing Nora's love for nature and her fascination with wildlife documentaries, Eric suggested a visit to the zoo, a place Nora had never visited. Let's spend a day at the zoo, Mom. I know how much you love animals, and I think you'll love it, Eric announced enthusiastically, hoping the idea would cheer Nora up. The suggestion lit up Nora's face. That sounds wonderful, Eric. I'd love to, she replied, her voice full of an animation Eric hadn't heard in days. They both got in the car the next morning, chatting excitedly about the animals they hoped to see. Nora seemed genuinely excited, her joy a sight that warmed Eric's heart. As they drove down the highway, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by an out-of-control car that appeared suddenly. The driver, apparently having a sudden medical episode, had fainted with his foot still on the accelerator. The car sped directly towards them, and in an instant of pure reflex, Eric tried to swerve, but it was too late. Eric's car crashed violently against a tree. The impact was brutal. Eric felt a sharp pain in his arm, but his immediate concern was his mother. Nora was unconscious, bleeding from a cut caused by shards of glass. Eric, panicking but trying to stay calm, immediately called for an ambulance. Please, come quickly. There's been an accident. My mother is injured, he shouted into the phone, his voice trembling. In minutes, the ambulance arrived, and both Nora and the driver who caused the accident were quickly taken to the hospital. As he followed the ambulance, Eric felt a mixture of fear and anguish, hoping against all hope that his mother would recover. The day that had begun with the promise of joy and adventure had turned into a nightmare. At the hospital, the atmosphere was tense as Eric awaited news about his mother's condition. The doctor finally appeared with a serious expression. We need a blood donor for Nora, she explained. Do you know her blood type? Eric, clearly worried, quickly replied, No, I don't know. Let's do some tests to find out, the doctor said before heading off to start the process. Moments later, she returned with surprising news. You and Nora share the same blood type. You could donate blood for her. Of course, Eric replied without hesitation, relieved to be able to help. While Eric was in the donation room, a nurse commented as she prepared the transfusion, Your blood type is quite rare, just like your mother's. Eric, still connected to the donation equipment, explained, Nora isn't my biological mother. She adopted me. Really? That's quite unusual. Two non-relatives having such a rare blood type, the nurse observed, clearly intrigued. This comment planted a seed of doubt in Eric's mind. He began to wonder about the true connections between him and Nora. Could there be some kinship that neither he nor Nora suspected? After completing the donation, Eric returned to Nora's side, who was still unconscious due to the medication and the severity of her injuries. The doctor updated him on her condition. Nora is stable now, but we need to keep a close watch. She's unconscious due to the medication we're using. Taking the opportunity, Eric made an unusual request to the doctor. Nora is my adoptive mother, and we both have a very rare blood type. Neither of us knows who my biological mother is, and I was left at her house when I was a baby. Would it be possible to do a DNA test to see if there's any kinship between us? The doctor, understanding the importance of the request for Eric, agreed. We can do the DNA test, yes, but you'll have to bear the costs of the exam. Eric didn't hesitate. Please do it. I'll pay whatever is necessary. The test was ordered, and while awaiting the results, Eric spent his days by Nora's bedside, praying for her speedy recovery. The bond that united them was deep, formed not only by the years as mother and son but perhaps, he began to suspect, by blood ties they had never imagined existed. Finally, the day came when the doctor brought the DNA test results. Eric sat beside Nora's bed, holding her still unconscious hand. The doctor looked at Eric with an expression he couldn't decipher and said, "Eric, the DNA test results have confirmed that Nora is indeed your biological mother." Eric found himself in a state of deep introspection, sitting in the quiet living room of his home. The shock of discovering that Nora, the woman he had always called Mom and believed to be his adoptive mother, was actually his biological mother still troubled him. He wondered incessantly why Nora would lie about something so fundamental. As the days passed, while Nora still fought for her life in the hospital, Eric desperately tried to uncover more about her past, seeking to understand the reasons that might have led her to hide the truth about his origin. However, every attempt to find more information about Nora's life before he entered it led to a dead end. Then one morning, Eric was awakened by a call from the hospital with news that brightened his day. Nora had woken up and was showing signs of improvement. Rushing to the hospital, full of hope and anxiety, Eric was intercepted by the doctor before he could see Nora. "Eric," the doctor began in a cautious tone, "your mother is still very weak. It's crucial that we avoid any kind of stress or strong emotion for now. I think it would be best not to mention anything about the secret you've discovered." Eric agreed, understanding the fragility of the situation. "I understand. I won't talk about it," he promised before entering Nora's room. Upon seeing him, Nora smiled, an expression of relief and joy crossing her face. Eric held her hand, and they talked briefly about trivialities before Nora, exhausted, fell asleep again. Eric left the room with mixed feelings, relieved to see his mother improving, but still troubled by unanswered questions. Back home, Eric sat looking at the ceiling, lost in thought. How would he approach Nora about her true story once she recovered? He knew he needed answers, but he also wanted to protect her health. It was then that he remembered the mysterious figure Nora had seen from the car window that fateful day. She had denied knowing that woman, but something inside him said she might be the key to unraveling Nora's past. Perhaps that woman knew why Nora had decided to lie about being his adoptive mother. Eric was determined to find out more about Nora's past, his mother, and so he had spoken with several of her friends. All of them confirmed they knew Nora when Eric was little. None of them had memories of Nora with any relatives or a husband. "Nora was always very private," they said. This comment was repeated, reinforcing the image of a woman who kept her secrets very well. Faced with a lack of information, Eric decided to follow the only lead he had left, the mysterious woman Nora had spotted days before the accident. He remembered the building where the woman had entered, a building that seemed abandoned or squatted, with no gates or access control. Eric went there, his heart pounding, not just from the effort of climbing the stairs, but from the anxiety of what he might discover. Upon entering the building and starting up the stairs, Eric encountered a man who was also walking down the hallway. Seeing an opportunity, Eric didn't hesitate. "Sir, do you know Nora Miller?" he asked immediately. The man stopped, clearly surprised by the unexpected question. "Yes, I know her," he replied, a look of recognition crossing his face. "Who are you?" he asked curiously. Eric quickly introduced himself. "I'm Eric, Nora's son." The man let out a laugh, a mixture of surprise and disbelief. "I never imagined Nora would have a son, although it was a big dream of hers," he commented, looking at Eric as if trying to see traces of Nora in him. The man introduced himself as Richard, and as they talked, it became clear that he knew much more about Nora than Eric could have imagined. Curious and increasingly anxious, Eric asked if Richard knew any of Nora's relatives. Richard laughed again before answering. "Yes, her sister, Nina. She's my ex. I can tell you where she lives, but it'll cost you." Without hesitation, Eric pulled out all the money he had in his wallet and gave it to Richard, who quickly scribbled an address on a piece of paper. Richard then revealed something even more surprising. "Nora came here a few days ago. She saw me passing by and got out of the car. It seems she was looking for her sister." At that moment, Eric realized that the mysterious figure Nora was following that day was Richard himself. With his aunt's address in hand and his head spinning with all the new information, Eric thanked Richard and left the building, now with a new destination and a new hope of unraveling the secrets Nora had kept for so many years. As he headed to the address provided, Eric reflected on the revelations. The possibility of finally understanding more about his family, and perhaps even meeting his Aunt Nina, filled his heart with a complex mix of emotions. Eric was one step away from uncovering a part of his history that had always been hidden, opening new paths to understanding who he really was. Eric arrived at the address provided by Richard with a mixture of expectation and anxiety. The house before him was in a state of deterioration as advanced as Richard's building, with peeling paint and broken windows suggesting years of neglect. Eric hesitated before knocking on the door, his hand trembling slightly. After some firm knocks, a hoarse voice shouted from inside, hurling insults and warning that she was coming to answer. When the door finally opened, Eric almost lost his balance from the impact of the sight before him. There stood a woman who could very well be the mirror image of his mother, Nora. "Are you Nina?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Yes, that's me," she replied with a wary expression. Confirmed that Nina and Nora were identical twins, Eric felt as if he were looking at his mother, although Nina's worn clothes and disheveled appearance formed a stark contrast to the always well-presented Nora. "I'm Eric, Nora's son," he introduced himself. Upon hearing this, Nina's expression changed instantly, a mixture of surprise and nervousness crossing her face. "Come in," she said, opening the door wider. Once inside, Eric wasted no time. "My mother never told me about you," he declared, getting straight to the point. "She was just trying to protect you," Nina replied, her hands trembling slightly. "Protecting me from what?" Eric asked, his curiosity mixed with growing apprehension. "It's a long story," Nina began, but then, overcome by emotion, she started to cry. Between sobs, she confessed, "I'm sorry for giving you to Nora, but I had no choice." Nina's words were like a punch to Eric's gut. He felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "So you're my biological mother?" he managed to ask, his voice laden with shock and confusion. Before Nina could answer, Eric, unable to process the revelation, ran out of the house. He needed space, air. He needed to understand what he had just discovered. Without thinking, he drove to the hospital to see Nora. At the hospital, Eric shared his discovery with the doctor, who was as surprised as he was. "It's possible," she admitted after hearing the story. "If Nina and Nora are identical twins and you do a DNA test, both could show up as your biological mother because twins have the same DNA. This means that even if Nora is technically your aunt, the test could indicate she's your mother." Eric sat beside Nora's bed, looking at the woman who had raised and loved him as a son. He was filled with conflicting emotions: gratitude for the life Nora had given him, confusion about the hidden truth, and a new curiosity about Nina's role in his life. The pieces of his existence's puzzle were beginning to fit together, but each new revelation only led to more questions. How Eric would deal with these truths and how they would shape his future were answers only time could reveal. Eric decided to stop searching for the truth about his past. The mental exhaustion of unearthing family secrets that were perhaps best left alone weighed on him. Nora, on the other hand, had recovered well and, after being discharged, returned home with Eric, who continued to treat her with all the love and respect as always, as his mother. Eric still kept the revelations about Nina and his true origin to himself, waiting for the right moment to discuss it all with Nora. However, Eric's decision to wait was overridden by events when, one day, without warning, Nina knocked on their door. Upon opening the door and seeing Nina, Nora reacted with a mixture of shock and joy, rushing to hug her sister. Between tears and smiles, Nora explained that she had been trying to find Nina for years, but Richard never wanted to reveal where she lived. Nora was visibly nervous about Eric seeing Nina, fearing her son's reaction to the woman who was his biological mother. However, Eric calmly revealed that he had already met Nina. Nora looked at Eric, surprised and a little confused, as emotions showed on her face. With Nina sitting next to Nora on the living room sofa, Eric asked them to share their story, wishing to fully understand the past that had shaped their lives in such complex and painful ways. Nora began, her voice trembling with the emotion of reliving painful memories. Years ago, she was dating a man she was deeply in love with. Everything seemed perfect until she got pregnant, a pregnancy that proved complicated from the start. At only 6 months, Nora suffered a miscarriage, a traumatic event that not only resulted in the loss of the baby but also her ability to have more children. "I lost everything in that period," Nora shared, tears streaming freely. "My boyfriend, unable to cope with the news that I couldn't have children, left me. It was a double blow that almost destroyed me." As Nora told her story, Nina listened, her own somber countenance reflecting remorse and pain. Nina, unlike Nora, led a reckless life back then, constantly attending parties, abusing alcohol, and even illicit substances. "Nora always tried to set me straight," Nina added, her voice hoarse with emotion. "But I was young and rebellious and didn't want to listen. I didn't realize how much my sister was suffering, nor how much she needed me." Nina's life had always been permeated by risky choices and dangerous relationships, and her connection with Richard was proof of that. Richard, a man of dubious character, involved Nina in a series of petty crimes that quickly escalated into more serious problems. Together, they found themselves entangled not only with the police but also with dangerous and relentless unsavory figures. One day, the situation became unbearable. Nina showed up desperate at Nora's house and said she needed to run away. "It's not safe for me, and it won't be safe for you either," she explained, anxiety clear in her voice. She revealed to Nora that their physical resemblance could put Nora in danger, as criminals could easily confuse them. Understanding the risk, Nora decided the only solution was to move to a new city. She moved to the city where Eric would eventually grow up, while Nina disappeared in an unknown direction. Before leaving, Nora gave Nina a copy of the keys to her new house, a gesture that symbolized the hope that one day, perhaps, their lives could reconnect under better circumstances. Years passed, and Nina's life continued to be tumultuous. She was still involved with Richard and eventually discovered she was pregnant. Knowing Richard wouldn't accept the child and fearing for her safety, Nina chose to keep the pregnancy a secret. When it was time to give birth, she found herself alone, with no one to trust except the sister she knew had always wanted to be a mother. Remembering Nora's unfulfilled dream and the key she still possessed, Nina made a choice that would change their lives forever. Under the cover of night, she went to Nora's house. Knocking on the door and getting no answer, she used her key to enter through the back. With tears in her eyes and a heavy heart, she left her newborn son on top of the kitchen table. Then, as silently as she had arrived, Nina disappeared again into the darkness of the night. When the police arrived the next morning, alerted by Nora who had found a baby in her house, questions were asked about possible intruders. Nora immediately suspected it might have been her sister, but chose to remain silent about her suspicions. Revealing the truth could lead the police directly to Nina, who was still fleeing from justice. As Eric grew up, it was impossible not to notice the similarities between him and Nina, and indirectly with Nora. His appearance, his gestures, and even his smile were echoes of the woman Nora knew as her twin sister. These initially subtle similarities became more evident as Eric matured, becoming a constant reminder of the secret bond that united the lives of Nora, Nina, and Eric. Nora, loving Eric as her own son, kept the secret of his origins, protecting him from the complicated truths of his birth and Nina's turbulent life. Eric could never have imagined the twists and turns his life would take after discovering that Richard, a man he had briefly met and who hadn't made a good impression on him, was actually his biological father. Eric was stunned. Those few minutes had been enough for him to understand that Nina had made the right choice in keeping him away from Richard. Despite all the newly discovered truth, Eric continued to consider Nora, the woman who had raised him, as his true mother. For him, Nina, despite being his biological mother, was affectionately called Aunt Nina. Over time, Nina began to visit Nora and Eric's house, though not very frequently. Eric, always helpful, would talk with Nina and offer advice. Encouraged by his persistence and words of encouragement, Nina finally agreed to enter a rehabilitation clinic. "It's never too late to be a better person," Eric often said, showing unwavering support that ultimately proved crucial for Nina's decision to seek help. After so many tumultuous events, Eric decided to move forward with a lighter, more cheerful plan: a visit to the zoo with Nora. Nora, who had always been fascinated by wild animals she only saw in television documentaries, was delighted. Walking through the zoo, She observed each animal with a curiosity and admiration that made her face glow with joy. While Nora was entertained watching the giraffes, Eric felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning around, he came face to face with the doctor who had cared for Nora during her hospitalization. The conversation flowed naturally, and Eric ended up sharing with her the entire complex tapestry of his family. So your mom is your aunt, you call your biological mother aunt, and your father is a wanted man? The doctor asked, laughing at Eric's unbelievable story. We have to talk more about this. Do you have free time on Sunday? We could meet at the coffee shop, she said, interested not only in the story but clearly in Eric as well. Yes, of course, Eric replied, stammering a bit from shyness, the surprise of the question making him visibly nervous. After they said goodbye, Nora, who had been observing the interaction from afar, approached Eric with a mischievous smile. I'm already imagining my grandchildren, she joked, amused by the situation. Mom! Eric exclaimed, laughing nervously at the comment. The two continued laughing as they strolled through the zoo, enjoying the day together. Despite the surprises and revelations that had marked their lives, that moment of lightness and shared laughter at the zoo symbolized a new phase. One of acceptance, new beginnings, and hope for what the future might bring. Eric, surrounded by the love of his family, both the one he chose and the one he discovered, finally felt at peace with his past and optimistic about what was to come.